Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying Season 2 of the Maybe God podcast so far. Before we get started with this beautiful little minisode, I wanted to give you an update about where we are and where we're headed from here. So we're a little over halfway through this season, which has so far included 3 two-part episodes: my journey from doubt to faith, the Hurricane Harvey anniversary episode, and of course our most popular show this season, our near-death experiences for real. And now our small but mighty Maybe God team is taking a short break to work on the remainder of Season 2. Now, even though you're not going to see any new full episodes until November, we hope you'll use this time to share your favorite Maybe God episode with your friends and your family. And of course, we hope you'll leave us a nice review wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. That always helps us spread the word about Maybe God. So thank you for all of your support. And now, let's dig right in. On today's mini episode of Maybe God, a young woman's story of abandonment and betrayal, and what happened when she took the first step toward forgiveness. Hear nothing else, please take this home with you. Please take this in your car home with you and think on this week. Please, just these 4 words is all you need today. Please remember that broken people break people. And the same was true for me when I was broken. I broke people too, out of my own brokenness. And when you're broken, you break people too. And whoever has broken you, they're broken too. And so as that person you're thinking of, that enemy or those enemies that you're thinking of, and whatever they did to you, as you consider all of that, don't consider what they've done in some kind of vacuum. Don't consider their offenses against you as some kind of just purely objective choice. They came to you preemptively broken. And that is not to excuse anything that's been done to you, but it helps to have mercy when you think of all the ways they were broken by others long before they ever got around to breaking you. Listen, forgiving enemies is not about making friends. Forgiving enemies is about being free. First and foremost, it's about you being free. A few months back, I spent several weeks at the Story Houston teaching about forgiveness. It's become clear to me in my nearly 20 years as a pastor that resentment is the number one killer of all relationships. And resentment is a silent killer. It sneaks up on us. It festers in the darkest part of the human heart, and we don't often acknowledge it until it surfaces in the form of rage or apathy or even hate. Deana is a brilliant, beautiful, full of life 25-year-old in my congregation. I've rarely seen her without a big smile across her face. But if I've learned nothing else over the years, it's that no one has it all together. There's always something behind the biggest smile in the room. There's always pain deep beneath the surface, which is why I wasn't so surprised when I got this email from Deana the day after my message about forgiving your enemy.
Hi, Pastor Eric. I wanted to personally reach out to you after your sermon today. It really touched my heart. There's this person I need to forgive, and I don't have the strength to do it myself, and I'm scared to trust God. My father left me at the age of 9 with no explanation. I have not seen him since, and I've talked to him 2 times over the phone, but the conversations ended with me hanging up on him. When I turned 19, I completely blocked him and all of his family from my social media accounts. He has been a catalyst for a lot of issues I have fought through as a young adult. I have been treated for depression and anxiety for nearly 6 years now. It affects my dating life because I never had a father figure show me how a man should treat a woman. And it's left me feeling angry for those reasons. But then there's this sadness because I feel like I wasn't good enough or I did something wrong for him to abandon me. I know I need to forgive him, and it's scary thinking about it. I just ask for your prayers in helping me and trusting God. Thank you for all you do, Deana.
I realized after reading Deana's email, I needed to do more than just talk about why it's important to forgive. I needed to try and show someone like Deana the path toward forgiveness. So I asked her to come and talk to me one-on-one. So
Take me back to where this situation of unforgiveness and resentment and hurt began for you.
My mom and my dad, they divorced when I was 4. My dad was allowed to get me on weekends. And from 4 to 9, that's kind of like what my life was. Weekdays with my mom. While she was at work, my grandmother, who was a big part of my life when she was alive, would watch me. And then my dad would get me, I think it was every other weekend. I didn't see him that much, so I was more comfortable with my mom and my grandmother, obviously. They were like my protectors. And so when I left them, I was always I felt detached.
Vulnerable.
Yes. And then when I turned 9, that summer, he took me and his wife at the time and his stepson, and we went on this road trip to California and Nevada. And he took us to Disneyland and Universal Studios. And I think it was supposed to be like the best time of my life. And oh, look what I'm giving you. And we drove, and driving in the Arizona desert is brutal.
You're right. I've done that.
It's hot. All you see are dunes and sand. And you're just like, it's miserable.
Yeah.
And I missed my mother. I missed my grandmother. And I call my grandmother Big Mama. So if I say Big Mama, that's my grandma. And so I would like sit there and like sing songs about how much I miss my mom and my grandmother. And my father, he didn't like my mom's side of the family. My grandmother hated him. She was the one that helped get my mother out of divorce. She gave her the money to get away from him. And so I think in that moment, I'm his child, and him seeing like how much of a connection I had to my mom and her mother, it did something to him, I'm assuming. This is like from almost 20 years later, like analyzing what went wrong.
Right.
Because after that trip, that was like the last time I saw my father ever.
Did he say goodbye after that, or how did
He dropped me off, bye. And I don't really remember if there was a see you later, but
Wait, was there like a blow up?
no, there was no blow up. It was
You just have retrospectively gone back and thought maybe something a switch was flipped in his.
I really think a switch flipped. And I talked about my mom and my grandmother a lot during that trip, and it was because I missed them. Because I was away from them for 2 weeks. That was the longest I'd ever been away from my mom.
You were 9 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a natural thing that, of course, I'm going to miss my mom, the person I see every day, who cares for me and loves me.
So subsequent to that trip, did he reach out?
No.
He just
It
went.
just like, I think maybe it was like 3 months when I had realized I haven't seen my dad. Like, that's strange. And a year, and it's like, oh, it's been a year. This is really strange. And then I was like 16, he called.
Wait. 7 years.
Yeah.
You didn't hear from him between 9 years old and 16?
Mm-hmm.
Those are some pretty important years.
Very important years.
How in the world did you get through that time?
I don't really think I did, to be honest. From 9 to 16 were like very troubling years for me. I became very rebellious, skipped school, hung out with the wrong crowd. And what I did was I erased them. And the more years that went by, the easier it was to for him to fade away. The last time I talked to my dad, and I'd accidentally picked up the phone because I didn't know it was his number, I was 16, and I actually tried to confront him about, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. You're a terrible father. And he threw back in my face and said pretty much I should be lucky because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here because he bothered me. And I was like, wow, you're a terrible person. And I clicked in his face. And that's
the last time you've talked to your dad?
Yes.
So we talked about from 9 to 16. How old are you now?
I'm 25.
So what happened from 16 to 25? How did that manifest in that season?
16 to 25 was like a dark period. I lost my grandmother.
Big Mama.
Yes, Big Mama. She died when I was 16, which was really, really hard. She was my rock. That lady, she's like the strongest person I've ever seen in my life. You just look at her and all the things she'd been through in her life, and you're like, man, how did you withstand your husband cheating on you for your whole marriage and still raised 8 kids and had them like grow up to be amazing people? And
did you ever ask her that?
I did not. My grandmother was very like, you knew what to talk to her about and what not to talk to her about. The most I've seen her vulnerable was when her latter part of her life, when she became sick and I became her caretaker. I found myself at 15 spending my summers taking care of her and feeding her and helping her clean up. And it was hard. And I remember this one time where she had one of her legs amputated. My mom had ran to the store to go grab something, and I was helping her to the bathroom and to her room, and she had fell because she was in pain. And I had asked her, and I was like, Big Mama, like, are you in pain right now? And the lady who was strong and never showed her feelings was like, yes. And it like tore my heart.
You tell the story like it happened yesterday.
Yeah. Seeing her that vulnerable, it did something for me.
Again, at another kind of vulnerable part of your life where, you know, you're 16, 17, kind of coming of age.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you think was next for you at that season of your life? Were you going to go to college?
I was. Actually, had gotten accepted into Stephen F. Austin, and I had actually went to the orientation and had my dorm and had a roommate. And then they asked me, how are you going to pay for this? And I laughed. And my mother was not financially in the place to like take out loans for me. And so it was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to Stephen F. Austin. And I enrolled into HCC, and it was tough. It wasn't how I pictured my college life going.
You were probably working as well, weren't you?
I wasn't when I first started school. And then in November, I got a job at Borders bookstore.
The late Borders.
Yes, may they rest in peace. And that was my life. It became work and school and hustling and trying to do what you had to do. And I just kept saying to myself, this isn't how my life was supposed to go. And then you're on Facebook and you see all your friends like off at universities and having like a ball, and then you're sitting here driving your hoopty to HCC and
liquidating Borders.
Yes, and liquidating Borders.
Yeah. Man, brutal. I get a little worked up about these things as a father, and I feel like fathers have such power.
They do, and I don't think they realize it.
Most don't realize the power that fathers have to affect change in either direction. I mean, mothers have power too, don't get me wrong. It's just different how fathers impact a person in their soul, for good or bad. How do you feel like your father's absence has impacted you on that soul level and your deepest level of who you are day to day?
I think the most it's affected me is when it comes to dating. The first man I was supposed to love, my dad, did not turn out well. And so I don't really know, like he wasn't there to teach me or show me like how a man should treat you and what you should look for in a man. And he's not a very great man. And so I either find myself, I just don't have any self-value and I just go and I sleep around with random guys and devalue myself. I'm not saying I don't know what my value is, but being that I didn't have him there to kind of...
That's going to be your default. And that's obviously, that's how it works. It's going to be your default to devalue yourself.
Or I find myself just going after the wrong guys. And when I go after them, I go hard. I'm like, I want a man's love so bad. And I'm so extra to the point where I like push them away or run them away.
Yeah.
And I realize like that's what I do. And I've accepted, like I know I need to like change my ways. And I realize this is probably stemmed from like not having a father around.
Yeah, sure it does. And I think more acutely, it probably stems from, I mean, dealing with today, it stems from not having forgiven him.
Yes.
Which is why you wrote to me.
It is. When I wrote that email, my heart was just like, it was so heavy. After your sermon, it was so powerful. And it's like, I want to forgive him. I just don't know how or where to even start.
Yeah. I want to talk real quick before we circle back to your dad. I want to talk about Big Mama for a second, because you mentioned something about her strength and the things she endured in life. You mentioned a cheating husband, 8 kids. Mm-hmm. What else did she overcome?
Well, one of her sons, her oldest son, fought in Vietnam and he died there. And my mom said that was like the first and probably only time she's seen her mother cry.
Yeah. And she lived through civil rights era.
She did. I mean, they were poor.
Yeah.
They were really poor. They lived kind of like in a shack. I don't even think they had doors. I mean, she had what she could provide for her children, and she made it work. Which I kind of respect, because I feel like some people would have just given up.
Of course.
So,
most would.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me when I hear these stories of people who just don't back down. They don't cave in. And you've talked about her like she's the most well-adjusted, strongest person you've ever met. She helped raise you. She was always there for you. She never complained. Like, these things are all sort of signposts to something bigger happening in her life. She had somehow attained some capacity to forgive those who had wronged her. And I'm assuming here she's African American.
Yes.
And so she lived through that civil rights era where God only knows how much there was to forgive. Mm-hmm. From her vantage point, she lived as an impoverished African American person in the South. So who knows how much stuff she had to carry around with her, how much resentment she could have felt her whole life.
Yeah.
And how that could have seeped into her soul, and that toxicity could have manifested itself every day of her life, and no one would have blamed her.
Nope.
And you would have understood, and everyone would have, but she wasn't that person.
She was not that person.
So she had somehow over time attained some capacity for forgiveness, some understanding of grace and how it works. Sometimes I think we feel like grace really works like you're just a nice person, like you're a doormat. You're the one who gets stepped on and you're happy about it. You're fine with it. That's not who she was either. You've talked about her being the strongest person.
She was strong.
And so she understood the true grace, which is it's got weakness and strength in it. It's got vulnerability and power in it. So true grace, sometimes it sits, sometimes it stands. And she somehow understood that. And so she didn't probably see forgiveness as this reunion with her aggressors, with those who had harmed her. She didn't need to get back together with her ex, your grandfather, in order to forgive him. She found a way to forgive him that allowed her to move on.
Move on with her life.
And to be strong and sort of self-sufficient, or at least only reliant on God and no one else. And I think when we think about forgiveness, it's really helpful to think of it in those terms. Sometimes it does mean a reunion. And a lot of times with kids or with our parents or with friends and family, like forgiveness should mean, hey, let's let's get coffee and talk this through, and let's hug it out after. But there are many, many times when forgiveness doesn't look like that at all. When you forgive as you walk away. I call it the forgiveness finger. And you're done.
I like that.
Because what happens in the absence of that kind of forgiveness is prison, which is where you have been.
Yes.
You have, even as you've been driving to your job and doing college and everything else, you've been in this invisible prison,
Yep.
a spiritual soul level prison, and your dad has been the warden.
He has. When I was 20, that was like my darkest year. I was in a major depressive episode, and I wanted to end it. I didn't know how to go on with life. That was probably the scariest time of my life. Thinking about killing myself. It was brutal.
It is understandable. Because listen, like, it's perfectly appropriate for you to believe your father should have been there for you. He should have. He should have been there for you. That is the basic duty of every father, to be there for you. And you were not given those basic protections that every little boy and girl should be given by their father, by, I believe, God's design. Like, that's how it's supposed to work.
Yep.
But your father abdicated and ran away. For whatever reason, we can dig into like his past probably and find some stuff there. Like, broken people break people, right?
Exactly.
So he was predisposed to this for some reason, and you know, if that helps your heart heal, to know that he was predisposed to this for some reason, then you can think those thoughts. But he should have been there for you. And so then my mind shifts to God when I think of 9-year-old Deana, defenseless in many ways, and starting to learn some unhealthy coping mechanisms, like, my dad doesn't even exist to me, he's dead to me, rather than dealing with, you know, the stuff going on, which is perfectly normal for you to have done. I think about God, like, why does God let this happen? And if God is good, and if God is all loving and all powerful, why does 9-year-old Deana go through something like that defenseless? And why does 20-year-old Deana sit in a dark room and want to kill herself? And these themes come to mind from Scripture. Even life with God is rarely fair. And what happened to you was unfair. And when you look at Facebook and you see other, you know, peers of yours with both parents at their graduation, or with ideal, you know, dating life or getting married or whatever, and you start playing that comparison game, you're right to play that game. It's not fair. I mean, it's not a good idea to play that game, but you're not wrong. And so sometimes we ask God why he's not fair, and those are fine questions to ask, but really what the Bible reveals is a God who enters an unfair world with justice, because life's not fair, but God is just. And in the New Testament, one of the often forgotten teachings of the Bible among Christians is this idea of forgiveness as an act of aggression. Forgiveness as an act of standing up and saying, no more. You don't have power over me anymore. You will not harm me anymore. I'm free. And Paul in Romans talks about it like, when you love and forgive someone who's been an enemy to you, he says you lump burning coals onto their heads, which is
I love that.
an awful, horrific image, but nothing makes me happier than the thought of heaping burning coals onto the head of someone who's abdicated his duty as a father and left someone like you in your childhood alone and defenseless. And the very same sentence, Paul says, vengeance is God's. The vengeance is his, not ours. And as long as we're striving for it or hoping for it, like it's a cycle of unhappiness. But if we leave the vengeance to God, if we understand that life's not fair, but God is just, if we commit ourselves so fully to God that he becomes our Father, as he really is anyway, according to Scripture, then you have the ability to walk away, forgiveness finger held high, and not be imprisoned anymore by your Father who hasn't even been there. You know, he's been the warden of this prison, but in absentia. If you could illustrate your situation, that's exactly what's going on. Is you're locked in a prison, the keys are in your pocket, and the warden's been gone for years.
I have a question for you.
Ask.
To forgive someone, do you have to be able to like face them and let them know like, hey, you're forgiven? Or is it kind of like you can forgive them and still go on with your life?
Yeah. I think there's different layers of forgiveness, right? I think ideally you let the person know that they're forgiven, they receive that forgiveness, and there's a meeting in the middle. And then there's situations where you don't let them know and they feel unforgiven. And that's probably like the lowest bar of forgiveness. And then there's this middle ground where somehow you let them know. And whether or not they receive it is really not your concern. Because in situations like these, forgiveness is about you and not about your Father. And so letting him know is fine. I don't know that it has to be in person, but his response changes nothing for you. Changes nothing. If by some miracle he's stricken with the Holy Spirit and brought to his knees and apologizes and wants you in his life, then that's a different conversation. But in general, like, you're not even in the same category with this man anymore. Something happened to him to break him a long time ago, and he's never recovered. And you're not going to be him when you're his age. To forgive him is to say, God is my Father, and I am full and whole and complete. And I've learned to move on past this, and I'm not going to give you another inch of real estate in my mind or my heart or my soul. I loved you. In some ways, I still love you, but I'm done being imprisoned by you. And you can walk away with your head held high. And, you know, when I think about Big Mama, she sounds like she was a free woman. A free woman, even though she had many people and systems and whatever try to imprison her. She was free.
That conversation with Deana took place 5 months ago, and the message must have sunk in, because today she says she feels completely different.
Over the past few months, I've been really working on myself and putting myself first and leaning on God, and it has transformed my life in a very huge way. I'm a lot happier, and I am finding that I want to help people any way I can, which is kind of strange for me because I've never been that kind of person.
During our interview, I told Deana that I don't really think God necessarily creates the hurt in our lives, but he can take it and use it for good. And one of the ways God does that is by giving us opportunities to help others who are hurting. When you've survived some specific kind of pain in the past, you're uniquely equipped to help somebody else who's going through the same thing now. That's exactly what Deana is doing. She's become an agent of healing in many ways. Among other things, she's now leading a group of 7th grade girls at the Story, and she's studying to become a teacher.
I just want them to know that they have a positive influence no matter what's going on in their lives, because life is hard, and if we all stay together and love each other and care for each other, we can kind of help mend those little broken hearts.
Deana says that trusting God as her father has opened her up to all the ways that he's been blessing her life. And that's really the best any of us can hope for, right? Realizing that even when it hurts, life is a gift. It's a gift that comes to us freely from somewhere. from someone. And trusting the source of all these gifts you've been given, I think can really set you free from all the kind of toxic resentment that builds up inside the human heart. So I hope you'll trust God just enough to forgive somebody who's hurt you and to forgive them today. Whatever it was that happened, God can take it and turn it around for good. We want to thank Deana for her courage in telling her story. And of course, we want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in to this minisode of Maybe God.